This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
This kid had gone to like the research or like search function within Google Docs. So he wasn't on another tab. He was on his assignment, but was on the search function and was literally searching lesbian blowjobs.
Welcome to Millennial, the home of pretend adulting and real talk with your pals. I'm Andrew.
I'm Laura.
I'm Pamela.
And we are actually joined this week by not one, but two teachers who are also listeners. Hi, Chelsea and Amy. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure to have both of you on because this week we wanted to discuss banning cell phones in schools. It's been a hot subject in recent months, and then we went over to Patreon and we said, any teachers want to come on and talk about these new regulations being passed? And you were two of a handful who came forward, so we were like, well, we can't pick, so let's just go with two teachers. We'll talk to you two about that in a few minutes, but first, since democracy is falling apart, we thought we should briefly touch on what's been going on in the past week. So, of course, the first presidential debate was last Thursday. And right after the debate, I'll just speak for myself, I was a little woohoo for multiple reasons, not least of which being alcohol. We hopped into our recording studio and recorded one of our new roll call benefits for patrons at the Bay level and higher. And Pam, Laura, and I kind of cried and laughed and complained about how the debate went. So everybody can listen to our reactions to the debate right after it happened over on Patreon. And now there's a lot of talk about should Biden step down, and maybe we should save that discussion for another time. We're going to be off next week, maybe 2 weeks from now. We're going to be talking about
it's too much for my heart right now. I will say, for anyone who hasn't listened to the roll call yet, or if you're going to sign up at the $10 tier to listen to it, you're getting me at my most vulnerable, I think, because I was very upset. And, similar to Andrew in, a certain kind of state of mind. And I won't say anything more about that. But my feelings were out there. Andrew was kind of amused at how upset I was.
Actually, Liza, who listened to it, said she'd never heard me so angry. And I think it was the part...
You were pretty fired up.
Yeah, you were mad. I'm joking.
I lost it when I was recounting how Trump was telling Biden they shouldn't be children. That was the part that blew my mind.
Yeah. I mean, my thing, and this is all I'll say here, thing that pisses me off is I feel like with that debate, the campaign showed us that they have no plan B. And the fact that you have no plan B when your plan A is an 81-year-old man, that is discouraging.
Well, that wasn't the only bad news this week, right, Laura?
No. And obviously, I'll just say, I'll take whatever's going on with Biden over fascism any day of the week. But
of course.
What a choice. So yeah, the Supreme Court has obviously had more fuckery going on. We kind of knew they would. They saved, the best for last. So I think it's really important just to acknowledge what happened with the Chevron doctrine. This was basically the rule that said that regulations had to come from independent agencies like the FDA or the EPA, and that those regulators had to be headed by experts like doctors or scientists. But the Supreme Court said, no, we don't need that. Judges can make decisions about regulations now. So that has far-reaching impact beyond what I think a lot of us can really wrap our heads around. Just think about national regulations for what has to be covered by healthcare or what's allowed to go in your food. These are all things that are decided by these agencies, again, that are headed by experts in these areas of work. And now this ruling says, no, a judge can do it. And who got to appoint a shit ton of judges, not just to the Supreme Court, but to all of our federal courts? Yeah, that guy. And presidential immunity is a thing now, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And this came on Monday. So it was like Friday we had the debate. And then Monday it was like a 1-2 punch. SCOTUS basically said the president has immunity for official acts while in office. And that's pretty broad. Basically means anything that's related to the president's constitutional duties. He can carry out without fear of criminal prosecution later. And what's scary about that is it applies to Trump if he gets back in, but it also applies to any president.
Yeah, there are some MAGA Republicans who are very excited by this news and don't seem to realize this can and will cut both ways. If not now, Biden has already said he's not going to take advantage of this new ruling.
He should.
He should. Pick up that SEAL Team 6 phone and he could do what he wants. But he won't.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Honestly, I told y'all this in the Bay Hangout last night. I think the man needs to sign an executive order saying that convicted felons cannot run for president and be like, what?
Yeah.
I did it.
Well, and I have seen people on the left express concern that Biden is not trying to fight fire with fire. Like, now this ruling has come down. Why don't you roll in the dirt just like Trump will if he is reelected? And to an extent, I get that, but Democrats are just like the good boy, the good dog. Like, they're well behaved. We don't try to fight fire with fire. And shame on us for being that way.
Yeah, now is not the time to be the party of don't hurt me.
Yeah, I just want to say that as a trans person who is properly aware of and living out my queerness for the first time in these last couple of years, so this is my first presidential election as myself, this feels existential for me. And I'm terrified of all, well, not all possibilities, but one distinct one for sure. And I am going to vote Democrat either way. I don't know if that will be Biden or not, but I just can't handle the possibility of a Trump presidency again.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I'm super disappointed by Biden's debate performance, but he is still miles better than the other guy. It's still not a debate for me. And actually, over the course of today, I was working on another podcast and I was listening to them debate should Biden step down or retire, as they were calling it. I actually kind of don't hate this idea anymore. But even if he does stick around, him and his cabinet, the people he surrounds himself with, are still worlds better than everybody Trump would instate. And we, of course, can't forget that there might be one or two Supreme Court picks following the next election.
Of course, but it's really hard for me not to be mad at the party that tries to position itself as being like better and morally superior. And don't get me wrong, Biden is leaps and bounds better than Trump, as you said, but I'm still disgusted by the fact that the decision was made to put Biden out there on a debate stage with Trump when he was clearly in no position to be debating. I feel like they put him in a position to be humiliated, and that disgusts me. Anytime I've seen a lot of rhetoric, you see it from people who would want to say, if you think Biden should step down, you must be ageist. And I'm like, don't fucking high road me right now, man. Like, the stakes are too high.
Yeah.
They're too high for this. It's too high to be dialing in this type of performance, this type of candidacy. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, it's just...
I mean, there has to be some level of competency. And we brought that up during our talk, too. It's like age looks different on everybody. And you're not even just saying only Biden should step down because of his age. I think we're all in agreement that, like, if you can't do your job, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, you should not be there. And we've seen over the last like year and a half alone, we've seen multiple examples of these old people that clearly should not be serving our country anymore.
Yeah, Biden is not the first.
Because like the mental capacity just isn't there anymore.
Many people are sick of both of these guys, don't want to see them fighting to become president anymore. Maybe Biden should retire and let's give everybody a new choice who's younger. Doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican at this point. Some people are just willing to take somebody who's not Trump or Biden.
Yeah, well, with regards to presidential immunity, I feel like Sonia Sotomayor summed that decision up far better than any of us could. So we thought we would just share a few words from her dissent. She said, "The president of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he will now be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent." Holy shit.
I know.
If we survive this, her dissent is going to be studied in legal theory for the next God knows how long.
It'll be the last piece of paper remaining on a scorched earth.
She's a queen.
Well, let's leave it there for now because it's not the focus of our discussion today. But of course, we'll talk about this in the weeks ahead and what Biden does next. Before we get to this teacher-focused discussion, I wanted to first give a quick shout out to Millennial listener Hannah, who will be wrapping up life in her 20s beginning on July 8th. Her very nice partner, Chris, wrote in and requested this birthday shout out. So shout out to you, Hannah, and hope you're enjoying life over in Germany. They're over in Germany.
Oh, well,
Aww.
Happy birthday, Hannah.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
That was really sweet of her partner to ask for that.
I know, right? Why doesn't anybody do that for
know.
me? Pat?
Right.
Laura, my birthday wish is not enough every year.
No. Happy birthday, Hannah. And now let's get into our discussion today. To get things started, Chelsea, Amy, can you give us your teaching backgrounds and what you currently do?
I teach in southern rural Indiana, and I've been teaching for 11 years now. I teach English mostly. Last couple of years, I've actually taught some French classes as well. Started in the middle school for a couple of years, but most of my career has been in the high school. So I'm dealing with the older kids for the most part.
And how about you, Chelsea?
So I was a middle school music teacher for 6 years in a suburb of Dallas. I spent 1 year as an orchestra director and then 5 years as a band director. I left the field a year ago. And before I did those 6 years, I substitute taught for a couple of years, mostly in elementary and middle school settings.
So to provide a little bit of background, we're going to be chatting about some of the cell phone bans in schools that you might have been hearing about that are being proposed across the country. And to give a little bit of a primer here, it's interesting looking into this. Attempted bans on communication devices in classrooms is not a new concept. Bipartisan concerns about phones as a distraction or worse, a connection to the drug trade have been around since the 1980s. And it was really only after the 1999 Columbine school shooting that states and schools started relaxing the rules. But This conversation has started heating up again in recent years. And apart from smartphones being a distraction, the current wave of policy proposals in places like New York and California are due to concerns about student mental health and social media use, in addition to the distraction that it can provide in the classroom. And I think it's worth noting that New York and California are two of our most populous states. So things that take hold there tend to have a ripple effect across the rest of the country. So it'll be really interesting to see how things over there go.
You mentioned a few of the more current events that inspired this conversation. And as Laura was saying, there are some headlines coming out of my home state of California, but also New York. The biggest one was that the LA Unified School District decided to move forward with the cell phone ban. They actually voted 5-2 to move forward with this. And this would basically just ban cell phone use during the school days. So that happened last week, a little over a week ago now, and it's pretty significant because this is I believe the biggest school district in the state, or one of the biggest school districts. So this is going to affect a lot of students, and it clearly inspired Governor Gavin Newsom as well, because shortly after this was announced, he actually made a statement saying that he's planning to build upon a law he signed into effect back in 2019. And the 2019 law actually authorized school districts to be able to limit or ban the use of smartphones by students while at school or under school supervision. So the fact that lawmakers are looking at what LA is doing and already contemplating making some major changes or further changes is fairly significant. And then out of New York, it's a little bit of a different story. The biggest headline coming out of there is this act that is being abbreviated as the SAFE Act, and SAFE stands for Stop Addictive Feeds Exploitation for Kids Act. And this would require parental consent for social media companies to use addictive feeds powered by recommendation algorithms on minors under 18. And it would also prohibit platforms from sending notifications to minors between midnight and 6 a.m. without parental consent. And I believe there's also a clause in there about limiting what kind of information they can source from minors in an effort to use towards advertising and things like that. So lots of moving parts here with regards to smartphone usage and how it'll potentially be affecting kids in school and also outside of it with some of these new acts coming out of New York.
Yeah, and New York City is actually considering announcing a ban on cell phones in the city's public schools within the next 2 weeks. The LA Unified School District, by the way, you mentioned it's the largest one in California. It's the second largest one in the nation. New York's school district is, unsurprisingly, number one. So Chelsea and Amy, one reason we wanted to have you both on is because obviously you're experienced teachers, but we also wanted to hear what your experiences have been like in school, dealing with kids, or should I say working with children day to day. So Amy, do you want to start? What are some of the most distracting things happening in the classroom with regards to cell phones?
Yeah. I've always worked at a school with a cell phone policy, but because it hasn't been a statewide thing until now, which we'll talk about in a minute, I know that it's just never been strictly enforced, and it kind of always has become like each teacher can do what they want in their own classroom type thing. And so, for several years, I tried to follow the rules, which said no phones during class. Like they're allowed to have them during passing periods, during lunch, but nothing during class. But it was just such a fight every day. And it would be, just the simplest thing of just, hey, can you put that away, would turn into just so much anger and explosions from some of these kids, especially post COVID. Holy crap. And so actually like the year of like when we stopped going to school in 2020, so 2019, 2020, I started that year making kids put their phones in a little holder when they walked in my room, and then they could pick them up on the way out. I liked that, it worked, but then we didn't finish the school year. And then by the time we came back next year, it was like, okay, don't let the kids congregate anywhere. So I was like, well, I'm not going to make them all go in the same place to put up their phones. So I just let them keep them back at their desk. But it was still a fight constantly. So this past school year, I even tried like a totally different strategy. And I was like, I'm going to compromise with these kids and maybe this will work. I told them at the beginning of the year, you can't use them while I'm teaching. You can't use them while you have work to do. But if I'm done talking and you've finished all your work and we've got 5-10 minutes left in class, get them out. I don't care. And I thought maybe that would help them, be fine with not looking at them for 35 minutes and then having them for the last 10 minutes. And it was fine at first. But each week it would be like, okay, I'm going to get it out a little sooner. They would fly through their work and do really poorly on it just to be done, or just lie and say they were done and they weren't. And so they were getting zeros because they wanted to have their phones out. They would have their earbuds in while I was teaching, which I would, let them do that if they were writing or something. But while I was teaching, they weren't supposed to have them in. And things like that. It was just, it still became a fight. Even though, and it would be like, will you let us have them out? And it's like, not all the time. Like I made very clear parameters, but it was still a big fight. And I'm just not in the mood to fight with 17-year-olds. Like it's so dumb.
Yeah.
And I even, I one of the things I said in my message that was kind of an extreme example was that I had a kid during a test on his phone, which was clearly one of the things I said, you can't have your phone out during. And I was like, hey, put your phone away. And it escalated to the point that this kid stood up, screamed at me, cussed me out, threw the test across the room, and stormed out of my classroom.
Whoa.
Like it was so intense. And I was like, for what? Like to look at your phone for a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
Like, was that really worth it? Because he got like suspended for a couple days for it, which wasn't my decision. That's the decision of the dean of students. But
yeah.
I was just like, why is your phone so necessary to you that you're willing to get suspended for a couple days to not just finish your test first?
And Chelsea, what's your experience been like?
So it's a little bit different for me since I taught in music classes, and generally speaking, to play an instrument, you have to use both of your hands. So cell phone usage during my own classes really wasn't an issue most of the time, although there's always exceptions. So I saw a lot of issues with phones happening between classes or at lunch or even like after school, because that's when you get into the issues of bullying, right? You get messaging each other on Instagram and Snapchat, you got TikToks. And this happens all the time, inside, outside school. It's like it's an addiction. I totally agree with Amy. It became so much worse when COVID hit or post-COVID, because they'd spent all that time at home multitasking, doing whatever minimal schoolwork. And maybe that's unfair because there were kids who did do what they were supposed to do, but a vast majority who wouldn't turn on their camera on the Zoom calls and would be on their phones and just constant contact with their friends. But what was interesting at my school, across the 6 years that I was there, I saw several different cell phone policies, really just personal device policies. My first year, all the students had iPad minis for educational purposes. And so that became an issue when kids learned how to download games or other apps from web browsers onto their iPads. And so then they were playing games all the time. There was 1 year we allowed cell phones during lunch only, but it's just so hard to contain that. If you let them have their phones at any point and use them at any point during the day, they're going to do it all day if they can.
Yeah.
Even after we went to a no cell phone usage policy, there was just inconsistency in enforcing it, because some teachers still allowed their kids to use their phones for like listening to music during tests or at the end of class or whatever, which I'm not generally against, but it has to be implemented the same way across the school if you're going to have any kind of consistency with the kids expecting a certain behavior. But because some teachers would give them an inch, they'd try and take a mile in another class and then claim it was unfair because, but Miss So-and-so lets us get out our phones. And, even Chromebooks, my last couple of years, kids got Chromebooks following COVID that they used for like all their classes. And that was sometimes an issue too, whether it was kids learning how to play Fortnite on them or whether they were trying to watch YouTube videos during class, which I definitely caught a few times in the back row in the tuba section.
Damn it, tuba players.
It's so funny that I was just going to say, it's so funny that like, obviously we're not, we're older than these kids that you all were teaching, but it's like the same shit, different day sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because we were also trying to figure out how to download games onto like, the fancy calculators, the graphic calculators, like you could download games onto that. Or there was like Snake on the Nokia, or there's always something, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember
kids were trying to figure out how to do.
I remember when I would try to play with my Tamagotchi under my desk. And
that was a big one as well.
I think I got caught one time and it was taken away from me, and it was devastating because I had to feed my little pet and I couldn't. I was
you had to let it die.
He's going to digitally die now. It's so sad.
Well, it also reminds me, I don't know if y'all ever had this, but anytime we would have laptop day was a big day. So they would bring around the cart.
Yeah.
You know, whoever ran IT at the school would bring around the cart with the heavy ass Dell laptops, and we would get to use it to build a PowerPoint presentation or something. But, you know, there was always somebody who got caught, you know, browsing the web and looking at things they shouldn't be looking at. So yeah, I think it's just, with more advanced technology, we have more advanced problems.
And they'll try to block this stuff from these laptops or the Chromebooks or whatever else, but the kids know all the workarounds.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem at home, too. Kids learn these workarounds for getting past like parental controls on their iPads. I remember seeing a report from, I think, the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago highlighting some of the major flaws in Apple's own parental control or screen time settings where kids have figured out how to easily override it and then do whatever they want. So like there are a lot of problems there, even when you try to put in some guardrails.
Chelsea, you had brought up bullying. Do you think that bans would actually help curb bullying related to smartphone usage, or would bullying still continue like it always has? Would life just find a way, as Jeff Goldblum likes to say?
Will bullying find a way?
Yeah, will bullying find a way?
I think it would definitely make it harder to bully at school, at least in that capacity. But the problem is so much of it is happening after school, after hours, while they're sitting at home in front of their TV or whatever, laying in bed, looking at their phones and messaging each other on Instagram. I've definitely seen phone-related bullying at school, like taking unwanted pics of people or recording each other. And I've seen like Instagram accounts where kids post pictures of other kids and like post rude captions or whatever. But it's just, I don't know, maybe if you are able to enforce no phones out at school rules, it would at least reduce the fodder that they then use to bully each other on Instagram after the fact. But I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, and I was going to say a lot of the exact same stuff. That's where I've seen it too. It's that, I mean, obviously, I think, you know, when we were in school, I felt like I saw more bullying when I was in school because it had to be more verbal and out loud. But now it can be silent. And so, like, you know, there's a local Facebook group that I pay attention to just because they try to trash our school sometimes, and I want to know what they're saying. But they'll say all the time, those teachers are doing nothing about the bullying. They're not helping the bullying. Da da da. And it's like, we don't see it. It's literally silent. Like, we don't know what's happening because it's, I mean, I think we know, but we can't actively in the moment stop it because it's happening on a screen. And it's the exact same thing. We've had, you know, kids taking pictures of other kids, taking pictures of teachers, making the Instagram accounts and all kinds of stuff that it's just horrible stuff that I think if we have these bans does at least stop it during the day. And, you know, it may not stop it for the whole day, like Chelsea said, but I think slowing it down is at least something.
Yeah.
It's better than absolutely nothing.
Mm.
And then if it does, because I think jerk kids are always going to be jerk kids. Like, it's just going to happen. But if it becomes verbal again, a teacher can hear it and say, hey, knock it off. Don't be a jerk.
Right.
In probably nicer terms, but I tell my 17-year-olds that all the time. So
Sometimes 17-year-olds need that.
I feel like they're old enough to be able to handle being like, hey, don't be an idiot. Knock it off.
I was going to say, even if a parent is coming to you all and saying, like, look at the stuff that was recorded about my kid, it must be really hard to track down the source, right?
Right.
Like,
yes.
Probably nearly impossible unless someone snitches. And I'm sure that it's hard to get people to fess up. So,
yeah.
And I would think that by disallowing phone use during the school day, you would be helping wean kids off of this addiction.
Yes.
By allowing them in schools, they get that urge to open the phone. We all have it. And so I'm not saying this would work or help a lot, but it's a good step towards trying to get kids away from being addicted to social media.
Right, especially when we expect them to go into the workforce and not be on their phones the entire time they're working as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, obviously technology and like, you know, that kind of stuff is part of the world now, and we have Chromebooks too. And I mean, kids still do find workarounds on the Chromebooks. They always are going to, but at least like the Chromebooks we have are monitored, and that like I can literally see a kid's screen the entire time if I'm at my computer too. Now, if I'm walking around, they might be able to get away with something. But if I'm at my computer, I have my program up all the time where I can see every kid's screen and what's happening on it. And if they're on something they're not supposed to be able to, I can go, nope, and I can close it for them from my screen.
Nice, nice. Are you always keeping an eye on your control panel, if you will?
When I can, whenever, like if they're working on something, like I've taught my lesson and now it's like, okay, do the work.
Yeah.
Obviously then that, but if like I'm up and around and actually actively talking,
right,
and they say they're taking notes, they might not be taking notes. They might be doing something else. I do the best I can.
Have you ever witnessed something just like outrageous on a kid's screen? Like I assume like porn would be blocked, but
so I have, and this was when I was still teaching middle school. It was like my second year of teaching, and it still haunts me. But like, how when you're in Google Docs, instead of like, just having that up, he had the assignment up. This kid had gone to like the research or like search function within Google Docs. So he wasn't on another tab. He was on his assignment, but was on the search function and was literally searching lesbian blowjobs, which didn't make sense to me even. I was like, that seems contradictory.
Yeah.
I was like, what is happening?
Well, they were wondering how they do it. If you're missing a D, then
So I was just like, okay. So I just kind of took him out in the hall and I was like, listen, I saw what you were searching. I don't want to talk about it with you. You need to go to the office.
Just when you go home, search for scissor, and that'll give you the answer you're looking for.
Oh my God.
But apparently he was so ashamed that when he got down to the office, he asked to call his mom himself to tell her.
Oh my
gosh.
Are there ever times when this is happening, Amy, where you just kind of play God and you just shut whatever it is they're looking at? You don't say anything to them directly, but you just
almost always is what I
give
do.
them a look. Like, yeah, that was me.
Close it, and then they'll look up and give me a glare, and I'm like, sucks to be you.
I can't believe they still give you a glare, and it's not just like a startled, oh my God, she saw.
It is kind of surprising to me they would still try, because they know you can see their screens. They see you watching on your own screen.
They're bold, man. There's no shame in a lot of these kids, I'm telling you. I mean, they'll air out all of their gossip out loud to anyone, and it's just like, I wouldn't say those things to people, y'all. No. So like they have no shame.
Yeah.
Wow. And they tell you all too, right? So it must be hard to keep like a boundary in place, right? It's like, I didn't need to know about the like love life details of my middle school children.
Amy State has just banned phones in schools, and we will talk about that right after this break. Amy, your state is actually banning phones in schools beginning this month. So tell us what's going on there. And I think we can assume you're probably pretty excited about this, because you were saying earlier, there hasn't been this wider ban. It's been like, teachers, you do it your own way. But now that there's a statewide ban, you'll be able to be more effective, I think.
Ideally, but there are still problems with that school to school, and I'll explain that here in a minute. But yeah, so Indiana has enacted a new law, and pulling it up really fast, Senate Bill 185, that essentially says that any portable wireless device, so this includes phones, it includes like kids' own personal tablets or laptops, or gaming devices, it says. I don't have kids bringing gaming devices though. Says they cannot be on those during instructional time. So it is very specific to during class time. So that means that they could potentially, as long as school allows it, have them during passing periods and lunch, which as far as I know, my school is still going to allow that. And then it does have some exceptions. Things like if a teacher says you can use it for educational purposes, which I don't do often, but every once in a while, like that same program I have that I can see their screens, sometimes it over blocks things. And if I'm working on a research paper with the kids, there'll be a perfectly good site for them to use that gets blocked. And I'll be like, you know what? Pull out your phone and look it up there. Okay. So that they can still use that good source, because I'm trying to teach them how to find good sources.
Yeah.
And so like, that's an exception. If the student needs it for like medical devices, that's an exception. Like if a kid's diabetic and their monitor is through their phone. I've had a lot of kids like that. Or if it's in their IEP, their individual education plan, to use something like that. So that's for students who have, learning disabilities or physical disabilities. Or it also says in case of emergency, which is very vague, but it is there to probably protect people who do use it in emergency. But yeah, so that's the state law. About, I don't know, maybe early May, so about a month before school was out this year, our technology coordinator sent us a school-wide email saying, hey, here's the new law. Figure out how you're going to implement it in your classroom. Kids can't use their phones. Do what you want. And we all were kind of like, can we have a school-wide policy? Because he said, well, one good thing would be like what I used to do, have them put them up in something that they have to put it in when they get in the classroom. And so like a lot of teachers were like, cool, like let's all do that. And can you provide something for us? Like instead of having us buy it.
Do I have to go to Dollar Tree and buy a damn basket for these phones?
Something. And so, but our principal just has no backbone whatsoever. It's unfortunate. And he's like, no, I don't want to micromanage. Do what you want. So I'm really scared it's just going to become what it was, which is the whole reason that I allowed phones at all last year, is because half the teachers did anyway. And I was always the one who was like, well, everyone else lets me use it. Why don't you jerk?
Come on, Amy, you're not
so
cool.
It's like, fine.
Miss Amy, you're not cool.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I'm not cool. So that was usually what I told them. I was like, I'm not here to be cool. Sorry. I'm here to teach you English.
Actually, you are cool now. You're on a hip, trendy podcast.
That's
So
true.
what could be cooler?
I did. I told a couple of my teacher friends earlier today because I was asking them for ideas for After Dark. And they were like, oh my gosh, we're friends with a celebrity. And I'm like, well, you're certainly not. But thank you.
Now they are.
We deem you a celebrity. Yeah. And Amy's students, Miss Amy is a celebrity now. So deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm super cool.
Be cool.
But yeah, so that is Indiana's law. And I think I am going to do what I did before, is have it's a calculator holder is what it was intended to be. And it hangs on a door. And I had it on my classroom door. When they walked in, they put it in. When they walked out, they picked it back up. And there was never really any issues with it. But the fact that it's not a school-wide thing and a lot of teachers don't want to have to go buy something, which is understandable. I just happen to already have something. They're really frustrated about that.
Yeah. Chelsea, what do you make of this new law? Do you agree with how it's structured?
It sounds kind of just like the honor system that's already in place everywhere anyways. Like, it doesn't sound as much of a ban as I was expecting it to. I looked in Texas to see if there are any school districts that are implementing any kind of ban. And there were a couple that popped up. And there was one of them that was using the security envelopes that concerts use. And the kids, even if they don't have a cell phone and aren't bringing them to school, they have to show their empty sleeve and take it into school. And it's like a tap in, tap out system as they arrive and as they leave school for the day. And that feels like a ban to me. But yeah, that just seems like an honor system. And it's just so hard to have the teachers be held accountable because, like Amy was saying earlier, kids will get so combative when you challenge their ability to use their phone when they want to use it. They'll yell at you. They'll complain to their parents about you. They'll say you're unfair. They'll call you racist. Like, whatever it might be, they will come up with any excuse to get upset with you for asking them to do something completely reasonable in a school situation.
That's
Wow.
crazy.
I was just I'm glad you brought up parents, because I did want to ask you all if like that adds more fuel to the fire, because I'm sure these kids are also just feeling entitled to say all that stuff because their parents are telling them that they're allowed to keep their phones on them, right? Like my mom would never. She'd be like, well, I'm deferring to whatever your teacher says. But I know that some parents probably do feel like it's safer for kids to have their phones with them all the time.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I had a kid where, like, when I didn't allow phones, where I was like, hey, put that away. And they were like, I'm texting my mom. It's like, okay, cool. Like, you can text her in 20 minutes when class is over. Like, I'm sure the world will not end before that.
Right. I used to say, your mom knows that you're at school right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And she hopes you can't respond because that means you're studying and paying attention in class.
But I've had parents email me and get mad and yell at me for telling their kid to put it away and say, yeah, I was the one talking to them.
Wow.
And it's like, that's irresponsible of you. Don't do that.
Yeah, you want your kid to learn, right? The security concerns, I definitely understand. If, God forbid, a school shooting were to happen, you want the kid to be able to call home and let them know immediately or something like that. But these bags that can lock up when you enter, we see these used at concerts. The problem is even those can be tricked into opening up, even if they're not going across the scanner that locks and unlocks. You can go on YouTube right now. I'm forgetting the name of these bags, but there's these little tricks with magnets to make it pop open. So I love that idea, but I just think even that is going to be thwarted pretty quickly, and word's going to get around school about how to beat those bags. So it's a really tough balance to strike.
It's interesting that you bring up the shooter situation, because we actually used to teach our students during our active shooter drills that they couldn't use their phones at all, because like, what if the sound goes off or a light is visible in a dangerous situation? If there's an emergency situation happening at the school, it should be announced like over the loudspeakers and phoned in by staff to the authorities right away. A few years ago, my school gave all teachers the ability to call in an emergency situation over the loudspeaker from their own office phones. Like there was a code you put in, and then you could announce, hey, this is the situation. We announced it a very specific way, so it was clear that this was like real, this was legitimate. And it is a scary situation. And naturally, your instinct is you want to reach out to family or whatever, but everyone being on their phones and causing panic with their parents, who are then going to call the school, call the police themselves, are just going to make it a lot more difficult for police to respond in that situation. So I mean, I don't know what the right answer is, but the difficult thing is it becomes a dangerous liability almost when students are trying to use their phones during those situations.
Yeah, that's actually almost exactly what I was going to say too, is that because we're taught the exact same thing, tell kids not to use their phones, not only just for, the sound it would make and the noise it would make and things like that while we're trying to shelter in place, but because it's going to encourage parents to flock to the school, where we want emergency vehicles to be able to get in there and things like that, and not have more confusion and more people in danger by them coming in and us not being able to get out to where we're supposed to go. And if if I'm supposed to go meet at my rally point somewhere for a safe place, but one of my kids ducks off with their parents and I don't know that, now I think I've lost a kid and things like that. So we actually try to do the same thing. And it's a scary situation. I'm sure if I were a kid in a situation like that, I'd want to call my mom. I get that. That would be my first instinct too. But, at the same time, it's like, but at the moment I need to save my own life the best I can too. And hopefully they get a chance to talk to their mom again. And hopefully that, these kind of situations don't continue to happen. But I don't think phones are the answer here. I think better gun laws are the answer.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what the safety issue is there, I don't know what to do in emergency for, what is the right answer. But I think it's difficult to say, okay, well, because the chance of this is the thing, kids should get to keep their phones all the time, even though they're awful with them.
It's sounding to me like one of the biggest problems, one of the big root issues is that we just need to combat phone addictiveness. Not necessarily like there's so much focus on taking the phones away, but we mentioned this SAFE Act in New York. You just can't, you are addicted to the phone. They design them to be addictive. They design the social media apps to be addictive. The colors that you see on the iPhone and Android, that's a whole thing too. That makes the phones addictive. My brother made his phone screen black and white. You can just go turn on some black and white mode in the accessibility settings, and he thinks that helps make his phone less addictive. Of course, that's never going to happen. Of course, we're always going to have texting, but it sounds like one of the biggest issues is fighting this at the social media level, for starters.
Something I wanted to bring up is, I think it was just last week, maybe the week before, is the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy called on Congress to require warning labels on social media platforms and their effects on young people, similarly to like cigarette warnings or tobacco warnings that have been effective in curbing the usage of cigarettes over the last several decades. So I don't know if anything will come from that, but that was a news story in the last couple of weeks.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because it also seems, I mean, my God, it's like a catch-22, because from what y'all are saying, it really seems like, due to the pandemic and these kids really being sheltered from, being out and about in society and out with their peers, they got so reliant upon the phone. And I think most of us are, to be totally honest. But when you're that young, you're going through adolescence, it's a tough time. I can see something like that becoming a little bit of a security blanket. And of course, when a high stress or high anxiety situation, like God forbid, a school shooter situation comes up, that's going to be the reflex. they might not even be thinking, oh, I need to call my mom. They just might be thinking, I need to be able to reach the outside world, because they were stuck in that for a few years,
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough. I have so much empathy for y'all as the teachers, but I have it for the kids too, for the situation, that the circumstances that they were put in that even led to this.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, again, I don't want to blame everything on COVID, but I really think that just it really put kids on such an online world that they almost have trouble existing outside of that. Like, we have a time in the middle of our day that we call advisory. It's like a homeroom, but it's just, we have lessons some days about different kinds of things outside of our, our class topics and stuff like that. But some days are just like fun days and free days, just to give them a break in the middle of the day. It's 19 minutes long. And almost every time we would have a free day and I'd be like, hey, just chat with your friends, talk for a few minutes. My 19 minutes would be silent. Every single kid on their phone, with a room full of
That's
kids,
so sad.
not one conversation happening.
Wow.
And I'm just like, talk to each other. And I would try to start conversations, and they would just look at me and then look back down at their phones. And I'm like, okay, just kidding.
That's so sad.
And to that point, I think that the board members in LA that voted for this ban, they did cite that there is very little meaningful conversation happening, like person to person, which is crazy, because I know we talked a lot about the COVID years during this episode, but even when you look at COVID, one of the things that people often point to is how these younger kids got no socialization during that time. So here they are with the opportunity to socialize, and then they just now choose not to, probably as a result of the fact that they didn't get that foundation to begin with, depending on how young they are.
And it's funny, it kind of all comes back around, at least for me. And I think others here are relieved when they get some time away from their phone these days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was volunteering at a camp over the weekend, up in the mountains, no reception, nothing, zilch, nada. Nobody had reception. And it was so nice not getting a single notification for like 10 to 12 hours a day. And then you come back down the mountain and you get the reception again. And, I'm sitting there hoping I see a push notification like a certain somebody dead at the age of 78 or however old he is. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it's just so nice being totally disconnected. Anything could be happening right now and you have no freaking clue. Like, there was an emergency phone up at the campsite. I didn't even give Pat it. I don't need to know anything. I'll be fine. Nobody needs to tell me anything for a few hours each day.
It's like, if it's not coming for me in the mountains, I don't care.
Yeah, either you come to me or it's not that important. I need to go dream about the mountains, so we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. To wrap up this part of the discussion, do you, Chelsea and Amy, think that this idea to ban phones in some form is going to continue gaining momentum nationwide? We started this discussion by highlighting how New York and LA are taking action. Do you think we're gonna see some ripple effects?
Yeah, I think in this article that I posted about the Indiana law, it's from NPR, and it was posted in April. But it says in this article that like Florida apparently passed a similar law last year, and on here it says Kentucky, Vermont, Tennessee, and Kansas are all considering it as well. So it's not even just the big areas. It seems like a lot of places kind of throughout the country are already considering these laws or passing them.
I don't know if it will gain momentum or not. And if it does, like what flavor it will take in each state. Like what I was hearing in Indiana is it doesn't really sound like much of a ban in other places where they're requiring envelopes, or they put it in a locker or in a bag or whatever the situation is. It's not on their person. That feels a lot more like a traditional ban. And I think people are just going to kind of wait and see at this point, right? It's like, did it work for them? Well, if not, I'm not going to ask these students to put their phones away, or at least not say that they can't have them in the school. And really, I think it comes down to, I think there's, as it was mentioned earlier, there's a learning opportunity here for creating healthy boundaries with our phones, starting at the middle school, high school age. And if you don't start it then, it's going to continue to be a problem later. So like, we just need to come up with some common sense phone laws in schools.
Yeah.
And like, let's be consistent across the board, whether at least in a school setting, at least in a district setting, let's be consistent and force it the same way Everybody has to be bought in, sign a cell phone agreement at the start of the year, abiding by that policy that is set in place. And that's going to be a better solution than just saying, no, you can't have it.
I think
Well said.
all these bans are a first draft of sorts, too. They're going to be experimented with. They're going to evolve over time. I don't think any of this is going to be solved soon, but over time, I think there's going to be more and more parents, teachers, faculty who are just fed up. The phone addictions are just going to get worse and worse until we do something about it. I'm optimistic that in the the decades ahead, there will be change. So, like I mentioned, we had a few teachers reach out to us about today's discussion, and we wanted to read some of the feedback that we received. Shelby said, I am a middle school language arts teacher in Minneapolis. I've been a classroom teacher for 2 years plus student teaching, but I worked in education in-school and out-of-school academic programs for about 6 years prior to becoming a teacher. My general stance is the school administration or district should have a specific policy. It should not be on a teacher's plate to decide how to handle phones in their classrooms. Basically exactly what you were saying, Amy. That may sound like it gives teachers autonomy, but it actually gives them something else to negotiate every single day with no specific thing at the school to point to. In my 2 years teaching, I've been at 2 different schools with pretty different policies, and it made a world of difference for me as a teacher. I'd vote for a no phones in school policy if the admin would back me up.
Yeah, having good admin is a big deal.
Well, Amy B says phones and other devices are distracting from the academic objectives for the students, but it also distracts from the other things that are learned at school, like pro-social behaviors and conflict management. As a band director, I also had several students who had almost no fine motor skills because their hand muscles were so underdeveloped from only using phones to do everything. Over my 10 years, the ability of students to use their fingers independently slowly dwindled to the point that it began being part of my check when assessing students' instrument choices. At the university level, I'm sorry to see the extent that constant phone usage has long term. I have university students who aren't sure what to do when a student they are working with doesn't answer their email or text, and I suggest to them, have you tried getting in contact with them while in class? And they give me a stare like, what do you mean, talk to them in class? Despite their digital native status, they lack word processing usage and can barely put together a coherent paragraph. The impact of cell phones is staggering, and banning them in school will fix one part of the issue. Unfortunately, it does not change the usage of a phone as a babysitter starting at an extremely young age. Kids are getting addicted to these devices way beyond their time in schools, but perhaps caretakers will see that schools are doing this and start to help them realize that they need to rethink their screen policies at home too. I mean, doubtful, but I can dream.
This whole, what do you mean talk to them in class sentiment? I mean,
So funny.
I think we feel that too, right? Speaking personally, I hate talking on the phone. I've gotten better about talking to people in person, but I think the fear of talking to people on the phone is a result of my own phone addiction over the last 15 plus years.
Yeah.
I don't love talking to people on the phone, but if I need to talk to them, I can go up and talk to them in person.
Yeah. I guess
I just feel awkward on the phone.
I guess this does come back around too, right? Because we often, I think we may have even discussed on this show how sometimes it's easier to be in an office just so you can go and tap somebody on the shoulder rather
Right.
than trying to get a response from them over email or Slack.
Yeah. It's so funny because I have another friend that works from home that lives not too far away, and every once in a while we'll just meet up and at a coffee shop and just share a table and work together, but like on our own things. And we'll just break for lunch and, grab lunch. And that's kind of like the nice little treat in the middle. But there was this one time, it must have been like the first time that happened that we decided to do this. She texted me like, oh, should we break for lunch in like 45 minutes? And I just said, yeah, sure. That sounds great. And she's startled. She goes, I wasn't expecting you to answer. That you were just going to text me back. I'm like, you're sitting right next to me.
Yikes. That's pretty bad.
So I guess I'll text you back. But, that used to happen too in one of the newsrooms I worked at, because everybody used to use AOL Instant Messenger to communicate. And there would be times when I would just be like, the editor's sitting right over. I'll just go over and like ask them. And they're like, oh, I didn't expect to see you. That's why we use the instant messaging service.
We wonder why people are so depressed. Nobody talks face to face anymore.
I know.
Jeez.
So it's not just kids, it's also adults.
Yeah.
Robert said, I believe that students should still have access to their phones during the day in case of emergency, but there should be dedicated times, i.e. during class rehearsal, events, etc., in which phones should be put away, preferably off of your person. That might actually help. Like if the phone is in the backpack, right? Not just like in the back pocket. The back pocket feels like too tempting.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I get it because, like, you know, I've made a concerted effort over the last like 10 years where if I'm meeting up with a friend, I want my phone like it's in do not disturb for like the duration of our hang, like if we're having dinner, for example, and I put it on in my purse so that it's like I don't even hear it buzzing. Or if I really need it out for whatever reason, if I'm waiting for a specific email, I just put it face down on the counter.
I always do the face down thing when I'm out with somebody too. I don't want the phone tempting me and potentially lighting up while we're talking.
Yeah. I just feel like it shows them too. It's like, oh, she's really like present here with me.
Absolutely.
So
one last bit of feedback we got here. This is from Samantha. I've been teaching middle school English for 7 years. I got my master's in teaching and student taught in high school, but my first job offer was in middle school and I took it. I have mostly taught 8th grade, so students that are 13 going on 14. I teach in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's a pretty rich suburb with a major university in it. The school population is a mix of upper-class kids whose parents are employed by the universities and refugees who have arrived in Chapel Hill because of the various nonprofits and other resources here. I support banning cell phones in school. During the past school year, my principal implemented a sort of cell phone ban. Students were required to put their phones in their lockers, a regular locker, at the beginning of the day and retrieve it on their way out at the end of the day. Most students didn't follow this policy because parents told them not to. They just buried their phones in their book bags, but it did drastically reduce cell phone use in class. They really are a nuisance to learning, and I don't buy that they make school any safer. My principal implemented this policy because students were doing outrageous stuff on the phones, especially in the bathroom or locker rooms. A student recorded another student naked in the locker room and posted it on social media. That really scared leadership into acting.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
And that will continue to happen.
Yeah, in my last year or two, we started acknowledging just the reality that students have cell phones and asking for students. So the policy was we had to ask for students' cell phones if they were going to the restroom because they would wander the hallways with their phones. They would go hang out in the bathroom and do TikTok videos or record fights in extreme cases and just take way too much time wasting their time on the phone in the restroom.
Wow.
Now the fight recording thing is bad in my school.
Really?
That's like they plan fights and they're like, okay, like who's going to record it so that it can get posted.
God. Again, they want to be TikTok stars or something, right? Right. They want to blow up there.
The fights don't just happen organically anymore. They're orchestrated for...
They got to wait for their camera person to get there.
Oh my God. And during the school day, not even just like, meet me behind the dumpsters at 3:00.
Right.
Back in my day, I had to be bullied for months before I finally snapped on somebody and fought back. Now they just orchestrate it all. It's nonsense. So continuing on the theme of tech in school, in planning this discussion, Laura, Pam, and I started talking about how there are a lot of influencers on social media who share their lives as a teacher. Speaking of what we were just talking about, though, they share educational life in a better light, I guess. These videos can be great looks inside schools, and surely they're extremely relatable to fellow teachers. I think that's why some of these educational influencers are so successful. But Amy and Chelsea, I'm curious how you feel about these educator influencers, because they are also, in a lot of cases, depicting students, and they're filming their jobs all the time. Do you have any feelings about these types of people?
So the influencers that I follow, because I mean, there's a few that are comedic in what they do, and I think they're really funny and relatable, don't show their kids, and so like I like that about them. I if I see a teacher showing their kids, I kind of gives me the ick, and I keep scrolling. So I don't usually follow those, but most of them, they might be in their classroom, but I don't think it's really during school time. There is one that I see every once in a while who definitely does stuff during school. that involves his kids, but he doesn't show them. He only shows himself. But he'll have like things for the kids where like he'll give them like a $20 budget, but then like they pick his meal for that day from like Uber Eats. And it's like, okay, they ordered something for me. Let's see what they got. Like, or something like
fun.
that. And that's kind of
That's
cute.
cute.
And so you can hear the kids' reactions to it, but you can't see them. There's a couple like that. But for the most part, I see people filming like honestly in their homes with like a fake classroom background. So like I see that more than anything else, or somewhere else. I shouldn't say their homes. I guess I don't know for sure. But yeah, so that's when they do show their kids, I find that weird. I don't like that, but I don't see that often, to be honest.
Do you think they clear that with the school?
Maybe, but I don't. My school wouldn't be cool with it. I know that.
Huh.
My favorite TikTok educators are the ones who don't show their students either. Like there's Mr. Hamilton on TikTok, who is more of like the COVID era teacher recording in his classroom. There's one who's more recent named Mrs. Frazzled, who does the gentle parenting videos. I'm sure everybody
I know her.
Seen her before.
Yeah.
She's done ones where she's like theoretically talking to Congress about what their priorities should be. But speaking on the showing students and the privacy concerns, there's one that comes to mind who was a kindergarten teacher, and she built her following posting herself recording Zoom classes during COVID. And obviously students' faces were covered. She only showed herself. But in one video, she called a kid by name and he got memed across all of her videos. The top comments on most of her videos, and even on her most recent video, I looked at her profile the other day from April, mentions that kid's name 3 to 4 years later after this was initialized. And so it's just, I agree with Amy. It kind of gives me the ick. Like, I don't want to subject my students to a social media following.
No. I could see some parents being really disturbed by that too if word got back to them.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it if I were a parent.
Yeah. And I think we all know that having a prominent social media following, not to say any of us do, but we can get a sense of what it would be like to have a prominent social media following. And if I were a parent, I may be wondering, is the person teaching my kid spending too much time focused on their social media brand and not enough time working on, teaching the kids, not just my kid, but all the kids in school? Now, of course, these teachers are paid terrible salaries, and good for them if they can make some extra money on TikTok or whatever. But still, like, there's a balance there. I think you'd have to strike. And if I were a teacher, I'd probably want to check with all my kids, even if they weren't appearing in the videos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, get them to sign a waiver.
Yeah, and give them a cut of the revenue.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they are creating the content in some ways for some of these teachers.
Yeah.
Especially the ones that even if they just use their voices
Right.
and stuff, it's just like not a symbiotic relationship because they're not getting anything. But
On a somewhat related note, at least speaking of social media, is it okay for teachers to accept friend or follow requests from students?
Nope.
No? What about after they leave school?
I don't mind after they leave school.
Okay.
But while they're students, absolutely not, at least in my opinion.
Right. The rule when I was in school was after you graduate high school, you can send me a friend request. And of course, I was the nerdy kid who wanted to send my teachers friend requests. And so the day I graduated high school, I friend requested all the ones I was interested in. And I'm still Facebook friends with him several years later, Instagram followers, whatever. But yeah, I, in fact, have a few students in my follow request tab on Instagram, and it's like, nope, not going to do that. And I'm not even teaching anymore. And it's like, no, you are still a middle schooler. You are still a young high schooler. I am not okay with that.
Yeah.
Actually, when I started teaching at the school where I am now, which is also the school where I went to school and graduated. So like these teachers were my teachers when I was in school too. But like my little sister was in my class my first year teaching because I have a half sister who's significantly younger than I am. And I unfriended her until she graduated on all of our social medias because I was like, nope, no minors in my social media, not doing it.
do y'all worry about your students Googling you and finding old stuff though? Like I have a cousin who's a teacher. He's been teaching for a while now. He's pretty young. He's not even 30 yet. And he used to write music. He did that all through like high school and college, and the students will like find his old music and like play it in the classroom like, oh haha, we got you. And he's just like, I'm not embarrassed, but also like he's like, I can't hide this.
Right.
Like I've tried.
So,
So I'm just wondering if you all worry about that.
all of my social media is pretty locked down, except about a year ago, I decided to start a TikTok channel that is not teaching related at all. It's book talk. And so it's just about the things I read. And so every once in a while, my kids will find that because I do have a few kids who need my number because I coach as well. And I have to communicate with my players for my volleyball team. And so like if you have the number saved of these people that your TikTok gets it, recommended to them, and it shows up on your For You page. And so I'll have random kids be like, I saw your, TikTok, but like it's so boring to them. So I'm like, okay, so like you saw me talking about a book I like. That wasn't exciting. Like you're not embarrassing me, but also don't bother watching it because I know you're not going to be into it.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I'm the same way with my social media. The moment I started teaching, my Instagram and my Facebook went on private. By the time I started teaching, Twitter was no longer cool. So I never went private on Twitter, and nobody's ever like look at my Twitter feed. Not that I'm posting offensive content anyways, but I, even now, a year removed from teaching, I'm still private. I tried going public a couple of months ago, actually, and a couple former students found my profile, and it was post me coming out, and there were a few who commented rude things on my pictures or messaged me. And, like it just wasn't a great situation. So I'm back on private, not sure when I'll go public again. But yeah, if you have something online, kids will find it. The most extreme case, and I say extreme very lightly, was a student walks in to the band hall before school or after school, and I hear a podcast theme song playing, and it's like, oh, they found my podcast. Okay, cool.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Wow, me too.
Yeah, but
And like Pam, you mentioned like Googling, you or whatever. I actually have a lesson with my kids where I tell them to Google themselves, and I Google myself in front of them to kind of like make the point that like everything you do online stays online. So don't do dumb things online.
Yeah.
But like if you Google my name now, my last name is Hill. So my name is Amy Hill at the moment. It's my married name. And there's an actress who has the same name as me. So if you Google Amy Hill, you're finding her. You're not finding me. So I always Google my maiden name with them, which you'll find like some things from like when I was in high school, like when I won scholarships, or like from my softball or volleyball days, like in the local newspaper. So there's nothing exciting to find. But I showed them that. I'm like, I live a really boring life, guys, and I haven't done a lot of dumb things. So you don't find bad things when you Google me. You should be like that too. Like, don't do dumb things and people won't find bad things.
And if you do bad things, try to get them removed from Google, because otherwise they will haunt you forever. As a little aside, you can ask Google to remove certain results, but you have to have a reason, like it's got my home address, stuff like if it has personal information you wouldn't want out there. So yeah, they're starting to do stuff like that, which I really appreciate. Lauren, Pam, are you two Facebook friends with any teachers who taught you?
Not from the days of like public school, because remember, I was homeschooled 10th through 12th grade. So my high school teachers were not anyone that I really knew. They were all like virtual presences. But I am Facebook friends with a couple of my professors from college.
I'm friends with my 7th grade. They would have been like biology science teacher. And he's just the sweetest man.
Aww.
Shout out to Mr. Jacobs. He's friends with so many of his old former students that he has like, I mean, they're kind of like non-existent anymore, but he has like Facebook groups for like every graduating class.
Oh, that's cute.
That he's taught. And every year on his birthday, he writes a little post update about how his life is going.
So sweet.
Yeah, it's just like, he's the sweetest. Yeah, like I'm looking it up right now, and it's like, he says, his last birthday was in January. He's like, I'm now 81 years old, walking 25 plus miles a week and enjoying life.
Good for him.
And then he talks about his wife and how she has Alzheimer's now, but he's like happy with his like 5 grandchildren that are within driving distance. It's like, it's really sweet. And he will, if he's like around, wish old students happy birthday. I'm impressed that he remembers so many of them.
Yeah.
Too.
Wow.
Because, it's like teachers, like, I think like we remember teachers that make an impact, but like you can't really expect teachers to remember every kid.
No. Speaking of teachers who make an impact, the 2 teachers I'm still friends with are my middle school TV tech teacher and my high school TV tech teacher, the latter of whom I've been really close with we've stayed in touch over the years, and he'll always be like a major influence in my life. So it is nice staying in touch with the people who made a big impact on you in school.
I want to say I messed up in thinking about this because I was only thinking about high school. And as y'all were talking about younger years, I remembered I'm actually friended with my second grade teacher on Facebook. So I am connected with her. We haven't spoken in a very long time, but
I loved my second grade teacher.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, coming up in After Dark this week, Chelsea and Amy are going to stick around. And Chelsea suggested we discuss, because we wanted to have another like teacher-oriented discussion with them two on. Chelsea suggested we discuss dumb things kids have gotten suspended for. So both Amy and Chelsea will share stories today. And I think Laura, Pam, and I, or at least Laura and I, are going to talk about when we got in trouble in school.
I have one story about when I got in trouble, and I can't remember if I've shared it before, but I'll share it again.
Okay. All right. So that'll be available at patreon.com/millennial this week, as well as through Mega Millennial on Apple Podcasts.
After Dark is part of Mega Millennial, which you get every week when you're a patron or Apple Podcast subscriber. Plus, it's ad-free. Visit patreon.com/millennial to pledge today. Spotify users will find a banner at the top of our show page, or Apple Podcast users can tap into the show and subscribe.
We also have other Patreon benefits like live stream access, our monthly Zoom hangout, a new physical gift every year, and much more. It's easy to get started. Apple Podcasts and Patreon offer 7-day free trials and annual subscription discounts.
Time for some recommendations. And in light of this week's discussion, I'm going to do a little self-promo. I work for this podcast that's pretty new called Those Who Can't Do. And it's hosted by Andrea Forcum. She is one of these teacher influencers we were talking about a few minutes ago. And
I love her.
Oh, do you?
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but she is my favorite. She actually teaches now at my the university I went to, and I met her a little while back at a conference, and she's amazing.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I don't work with her directly because she's too big time. But yeah, definitely check out her podcast then. And she interviews a lot of these educator influencers as well. We mentioned Mrs. Frazzled a few minutes ago, and she was actually the first guest. And then some of these other names, I Googled them while I'm editing, and like, there's some big names in the educator influencer community. So yeah, check that out. They discuss like wild teacher stories and then what educators need and all that. I feel like teachers and anybody interested in the world of education would really enjoy this podcast.
I wanted to recommend The Bear, which is back for season 3, streaming on Hulu. And I know we've talked about this show before. It's just so good. And this is a great time to catch up if you're looking for something new to binge, because the episodes are pretty short. They're about a half hour, and the pacing goes so fast. And they released all 10 episodes of season 3. So if you are caught up and you somehow missed that, you can binge all 10 now. I feel like this season is a little bit different than the last 2 seasons were, but I'm still enjoying it. We're getting some background info on some of the key secondary characters, which has been really fun. And I've been trying to savor it. So I'm only on episode 5 right now. But yeah, it's still great.
I want to recommend the movie Pearl. We actually just got around to watching this weekend. It's part of the series of movies that X is in as well. They're horror movies because, of course, that's my thing. But there is a third movie in this series coming out here this week, I think, called Maxine. And I really, really enjoyed both Pearl and X. So I'm excited for Maxine. So if you haven't seen Pearl and X, definitely check it out.
I wanted to recommend learning a new hobby, specifically a crafty one. I learned how to crochet last year, and it's been a great way to occupy my hands while watching TV or movies on the couch. But it's also been really great for stretching my creative muscles and making gifts for friends. I started with a Woobles kit. So if anybody's curious, you see those advertised on Instagram or whatever. Are they worth it? I thought so. It taught me how to crochet. And from there, I've made 3 blankets, a rainbow blanket to drape on the desk chair at work, some earrings, a bracelet, cardigan, a sweater, a pillow, and I even recently made a Stanley Quencher shoulder sling for a friend. So I'm always finding new things to make, and I have so much fun with it.
Great way to spend less time on your phone, too.
Hey, exactly.
I love that recommendation, Chelsea. I also have done several of the Woobles kits. I think they're so fun. My recommendation, it's not super new, but it's new to me, is the Hades and Persephone saga by Scarlett St. Clair. It's a book series. The last one in the series came out last year. I think it started in like 2019, but I just found it a few months ago, and I'm actually listening to the audiobooks. They're really well done, well narrated. It's a romance. There's a lot of spice into it, so if you don't like that, then stay away. But it's a modern day setting, but the Greek gods are still active and part of everyday life and things like that. And it's starts with the Hades and Persephone story and then expands from there. So but I really enjoy the series. I like a good spicy romance every once in a while.
Awesome. I hope none of our listeners want to stay away from spicy romance because we roll around in the dirt here all the time. But Amy and Chelsea, thanks so much for joining us today. We love getting your input on this important topic. Where can we find you both online? Chelsea, do you want to start?
Sure. The best place is probably on Instagram these days. You can find me at Chelsea CC, 2 letter C's, _17. I'm also a podcaster. I have hosted several movie and TV related shows over the years, and Eric from MuggleCast has actually been on my movie discussion podcast many times. And I also recorded the season 1 HBO The Last of Us discussion with them over on their podcast feed. And so we've been buddies for a while and going through transition together, which has been fun. And
oh, yeah. And your podcast is called the Cinescope Podcast.
Yes, that is the movie one.
The movie one, yeah.
And then I'm on Instagram, just Amy_Hill17. I'm not super active on there. And then, like I said, I do have a book talk that I was very active on until about a month ago. I've had kind of a lot going on in my personal life, but I plan on getting back to it. I'm just Amy Hill on there. And I think the actual thing is A Hill 811. Amy Hill with some book emojis should pop up. So that's kind of what the name looks like.
All right. Well, a couple of reminders before we wrap up. Just a programming note, actually. We will be off next week because 4th of July is later this week during our planning period. So we'll be back the week after that. We might release an older After Dark or something else into the feed next week. But if not, be sure to check out our new podcast, What the Hype. It's available on the MuggleCast feed as well as in a separate uncensored feed, which is called What the Hype WTF Edition. And make sure you're following Millennial in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And we'd appreciate a review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
To stay in touch with us, email millennialshow@gmail.com or visit millennialshow.com. While there, you'll also find all the links to our various social media channels, so please do give us a follow. Spotify users can also leave feedback directly within an episode.
After Dark will begin in a moment for patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Happy Independence Day. I'm Andrew.
I'm Laura.
I'm Pamela.
I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Amy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.